Supreme Court politics. Is the US political system on the brink of a constitutional crisis? Also on today's programme, the electric dream. We ask why the clean car revolution is still in the passenger seat. And in Picture This, locking down his legacy, Obama lays out plans once again to close Guantanamo. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Matthew Moore. It was a twist of fate that no one saw coming in the US presidential election race. The death of Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia earlier this month triggered a battle between Republicans and Democrats over whether President Barack Obama should choose a successor in an election year. The death of one of America's longest-standing political figures has fanned the flames of an already tense presidential election. And the fallout could be far-reaching. The composition of the Supreme Court was already a key issue in the election debate. Now it stands at the centre of the race. Today's newsmaker is Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, as we ask if his death could spark a constitutional crisis.
The sudden death of Justice Antonin Scalia has exposed cracks in the political establishment in the United States. He sat on the Supreme Court for almost 3 decades, and the 79-year-old was regarded as a top jurist on both sides of the political divide. But those divisions run deep, and they're plain to see in election year. Underneath the tributes and eulogies, a political storm is brewing. And a look at the makeup of the US's top court shows why. It's made up of 9 judges. The 8 now remaining are split between 4 who lean to the political left and 4 to the right. Whoever takes Scalia's seat could tip the balance, and that's seen as key for any decisions the court makes. It has ruled on contentious issues like abortion and gay rights. Under the Constitution, the president must nominate a successor, and any choice must be agreed upon by the Senate. But the Senate is dominated by Republicans. They've pledged to block anyone Barack Obama puts forward. They want the next president, who they hope will be from their own party, to appoint the new justice.
I plan to fulfill my constitutional responsibilities to nominate a successor.
So when Obama said he would find someone to fill Scalia's shoes, it set the stage for a new fight.
It's been over 80 years since a lame duck president has appointed a Supreme Court justice. And it reminds us of this, how important this election is.
It is outrageous that Republicans in the Senate and on the campaign trail have already pledged to block any replacement that President Obama nominates.
The death of Scalia has opened up a new front in the battle to the White House that has already seen bitter fighting between Republicans and Democrats. And the political deadlock that has resulted from his passing could impact the race all the way to the end. Ashraf Helmi, The Newsmakers.
To discuss just how significant the death of Justice Scalia is to the US election race, from Washington, I'm joined by Ian Millhiser from the Center for American Progress. Also in the US Capitol is Ron Meyer, editor of Red Alert Politics. Let's start with Mr. Meyer in Washington. Why shouldn't President Obama exercise his constitutional right to nominate the next Supreme Court justice?
Careful. I'd be really careful. Using the term constitutional right really implies something deeper. I know that Europeans and American liberals tend to think their rights are anything that the government makes up. Here in America, we take rights very seriously. We believe that there's something inherent.
Is it not the American president's role to nominate the Supreme Court justice?
If you read the Constitution, it says the president will nominate, and it says that the Senate has the power to advise and consent.
Okay, so why are you against Obama nominating the next Supreme Court justice?
I'm not against him nominating. I'm not against him nominating. I think what Republicans are saying is that they are not going to consent to someone who's going to fundamentally change the court and fundamentally change the laws of the United States.
In effect, then, you are saying that no matter who he puts forward, the Republicans are right to block it.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that. If he were to, say, nominate Orrin Hatch or somebody along those lines who wouldn't fundamentally change the court, then I think Republicans should absolutely consider the nomination. But I think everybody seriously doubts that that's going to happen. And you have to remember, this isn't unprecedented. This isn't just Republicans being obstructionists. Chuck Schumer said this just a couple years ago with George W. Bush. And before that, Vice President Joe Biden, the #2 in this administration, said that he believed that Supreme Court justices and other justices shouldn't be nominated at the end of George H.W. Bush's term. So we have people who are the leaders of the Democrat Party who have already set this precedent. Republicans are going to follow the precedent. And I think it's going to be a precedent for both sides going forward. I'm not trying to be hypocritical. I don't think Republicans are trying to be hypocritical on this.
The fact is, Mitch McConnell and other senior Republicans have said that President Obama should not nominate the next Supreme Court justice. It should be left until after the election. Is that your position? Do you accept that?
Again, nobody's saying he shouldn't nominate somebody. They're simply saying that in their power as the Senate, they aren't going to consent to somebody who's going to fundamentally change the court. So I think we have to be careful about what words we use.
Sure, they're not looking at the credentials of the candidate. They don't even know who the candidate is yet. What they're saying is Obama should not, and even if he does, they will certainly reject him. Okay, well, let's go to Ian Millhiser.
It's part of the tone that President Obama has set.
Okay, we'll accept that. And let's go to Ian Millhiser now. How do you see this? Is it a matter of democracy or is it politics?
Well, of course it's a matter of politics. There have been 14 examples of Supreme Court justices who were confirmed in election years. The most recent one is Justice Anthony Kennedy, who sits on the court right now. Justice Kennedy was nominated by President Reagan, who was a Republican. He was confirmed by a Democratic Senate. So what happens here is very clear. The past practice has been the president nominates someone, the Senate gives that person a hearing, the Senate looks at their qualifications. Yes, if the Senate has a problem with that person, they can articulate that problem and be accountable for why they vote yes or no. But that's not what Mitch McConnell is saying he is going to do. Mitch McConnell has said not only that he won't confirm this president's nominee, but just yesterday he'd asked if he would guarantee the next president their nominee an up or down vote, and Mitch McConnell said no.
Okay, Ron Meyer, the Senate's never taken more than 125 days to confirm a nominee. President Obama has more than 300 days left. Why shouldn't he go ahead and nominate? And why shouldn't the Republican-controlled Senate look at the candidate on his credentials?
Well, I think that they should absolutely look at the credentials. So I'm not sure I 100% agree with Mitch McConnell. But what we've seen with this president is that he's been absolutely unwilling to look at the middle, to try to compromise with Republicans, to try to do anything that would bring the nation together. And so because of 7 years of this type of politics, so the president has totally ripped the nation and Washington apart to not be able to work together, the precedent has been set already. And that's what I was getting to say, is that Mitch McConnell probably shouldn't preemptively go out and say that we're going to say no to anyone. But the fact is that President Obama isn't going to appoint someone who's going to be a consensus nominee. He's going to appoint someone who's going to radically change the court. And we've seen that with every single decision he's made.
Okay, Ian Millhiser, what sort of tactics do you expect from the Republicans going forward to block President Obama?
Right. I mean, they've already said what they're going to do. They've said they won't even give the person a hearing, much less a vote. They've said that no matter who Obama nominates, no matter how qualified they are, no matter how moderate
but they can only delay for so long, right?
They have said that they will not confirm that person. Well, I mean, they have the power to delay for as long as they control the Senate. So, the American people are going to have a voice in this. There's going to be an election in November, and if they're upset that Mitch McConnell has decided to shut down the Supreme Court confirmation process, they can vote for Democrats, and we can have a new majority leader. But in terms of raw power, yes, Mitch McConnell has the raw, unabashed power to obstruct this nomination, and he's shown that he will use that power.
Okay, Ian, let's just talk about what's going to happen as a result of having a 4-4 split now at the Supreme Court. It affects everything from immigration, abortion, unions, climate change. If we can just pick up on one of those policy areas, immigration, what does it mean to have a 4-4 split as we have at the moment?
So potentially a whole lot of chaos.
So is that
the ordinary rule when you have a 4-4. Okay, the ordinary rule when you have a 4-4 split is that it's as if the Supreme Court never heard the case and the lower court's decision stands. What happened in the immigration context, President Obama announced some changes to our immigration policy. A lower court issued a nationwide injunction, which is not something a lower court is supposed to do against the United States. And then the ordinary rule would be if the Supreme Court splits 4-4, that lower court's order would stand. The reason why, or one of the reasons why lower courts aren't supposed to issue a nationwide injunction is that it's entirely possible that someone else could bring this case up in a different court. That court could uphold President Obama's actions, and then you have two competing court orders, and I frankly do not know of a precedent for what happens when you have competing court orders and the Supreme Court is evenly split, so you don't know what the law is.
Okay, Ron Meyer, that's a good point, isn't it? You could have lower courts issuing contradictory rulings, and there could be legal chaos. Do you think that by holding up the appointment of the Supreme Court justice, it is going to damage the country?
Well, all I'll say is, as far as precedent goes, I mean, it's really rich that the same people who are in the Senate, Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden, there's a term for what happens when nominees are delayed and filibustered. It's called getting borked. That's because Judge Bork was blocked from being nominated to the Supreme Court during the Reagan administration, and his reputation was bloodied unfairly for months.
Well, he was considered to have
very, very
problematic.
125-day figure is up.
Sure, he was considered to have poor judgment by some because of what he said about the Civil Rights
we can
Act.
Debate, we can debate the history.
The question was about the delay. The question was about the delay. Is it damaging to the country?
Right, but
is it damaging to the country not to have this
all right,
resolved
if I'm debating you both, it's going to be a long segment. All right, so what I'm saying is there's a precedent for a delay of having an 8-8, and to say that, or to having 4-4.
Sure. To
say that there hasn't been a 4-4 Supreme Court, there's always going to be problematic rulings when there's a 4-4. There's no doubt about that. But as far as this particular instance, delaying something for a couple months isn't going to make or break anything.
It's not going to be a couple of months, is it?
If there are, well.
You're talking about
honestly,
at the end of the election cycle,
if you know law,
November.
if you know law in the Supreme Court, if you know law in the Supreme Court and American law, not Turkish law, if you understand law here, legal cases take years and years and years, and precedents take years and years and years. A few months in a legal process really isn't anything major at all.
In Millhiser, there are votes that are coming up soon, not years and years away, right?
Right. I mean, the immigration case is pending before the Supreme Court right now. And believe me, it matters to a family that's going to be deported in a few months, whether or not that deportation is upheld by the Supreme Court or not. But setting that aside, I actually would like to respond to what you said about Robert Bork,
Kennedy's going to go
because that's an instructive piece. I'm sorry, I am talking right now. Robert Bork was confirmed, or was nominated in 1987. The Senate gave him a hearing. The Senate gave him an up or down vote. They voted in a bipartisan way, 58-42, not to confirm him. And a big reason why is because Robert Bork said that the Civil Rights Act of 1964, our ban on whites-only lunch counters, was rooted in a principle of unsurpassed ugliness.
Okay, let us return to today's debate. And just a final thought from each of you, Mr. Meyer, if you will. Which side do you predict will win this one? And what's the most likely outcome for the Supreme Court, especially if we have a Republican victory after November?
Well, what I'll say is I do want to respond to the DACA case, the specific immigration case. Justice Kennedy, if you look at his precedents, he's probably going to side with the 4 liberals on the court, and that'll be a 5-3 decision. So I wouldn't worry so much about that one. But the other thing is, really, when it comes to who's going to win or lose, I don't think this is going to be that relevant to the election, to be honest with you. And it's going to fire up both sides. There are people in the liberal base that I'm sure the Center for American Progress will fire up, and there's people on the Republican base that are very fired up by the Second Amendment who don't want to see the Constitution fundamentally change.
Ian Millhiser, what is your prediction for the Supreme Court?
Sure. I mean, it depends on what happens in the election. If the same party controls the White House and the Senate after this election, someone's going to get confirmed, and we'll find out what sort of Supreme Court we have. if there is a divided government, if one party controls the White House and one party controls the Senate, now that the Senate Republicans have set this precedent that they will not confirm a nominee from a president of another party, I don't see a truce forming on that. And so we could potentially, if this seat stay open for years, we could have many seats stay open for years as more vacancies open up.
Okay, Ian Millhiser and Ron Meyer, both of you joining us from Washington. Thank you for your contributions to the Newsmakers. Still to come on the Newsmakers, after years of development, why hasn't the electric car replaced petrol? And in Picture This, will Obama be able to come good on his Guantanamo promise? Electric cars have long been hailed as the future of the automotive industry. Car makers and startups have been offering hundreds of high-tech models, promising, like any car, to get from A to B, but with the added benefit of lower emissions. But companies have struggled to make electric cars a mass consumer product. The Newsmakers' Sandra Gatman looks at what's been holding back the electric car dream.
Electric cars were going to change the world. They were going to clean up our skies and reduce our dependency on oil. Every year, car shows feature flashier, greener technology hailed as the next big thing. But these models haven't taken off on a mass scale. In 1996, General Motors released the world's first consumer electric vehicle. But the EV1 was hampered by battery problems and quickly discontinued. To this day, no electric car has really cracked the mass market. Manufacturing cars is expensive. Car makers need cash for assembly line equipment and spend years testing for safety and emission standards. A new car can cost more than $1 billion to bring to market. With electric cars, millions more are spent developing the technology. Silicon Valley billionaire Elon Musk thought he could change the game with his luxury line of electric cars. But his company, Tesla Motors, has lost $4,000 for every Model S electric sedan sold. Car makers are also competing over which batteries will become the dominant technology. Japan is pushing for hydrogen fuel cells, while China is championing electric batteries. The problem all the models face is a lack of infrastructure for refueling. But critics say spending public money on charging stations is a waste.
The money is simply not there to fund extravagant schemes, which are frankly vanity projects aimed at a very small number of people who have chosen to buy a very expensive vehicle.
These days, rock-bottom oil prices mean conventional vehicles are cheaper to run, and that's more bad news for electric car makers. EV companies get public grants to develop the technology, but it's no match against the trillions of dollars in subsidies given to fossil fuel companies every year, according to the IMF. The good news is, it hasn't stopped car makers from pushing boundaries. In Turkey, a group of students from Istanbul University think they've cracked the science, creating one of the most efficient batteries around. Their electric car, the T1, competes in races around the world. It's fast, light, and entirely battery-powered.
So this is the T1 that you've taken to the races. How efficient is this car?
In one charge, we can go in streets more than 500 kilometers. It's just built for the races.
This car traveled across Turkey on a single charge, costing 7 Turkish lira or $2.5 US.
So how long will it be before we see a car like this on the streets? Is that the dream?
We hope like you said, in 10 or 20 years in all around Turkey, we hope that with our cars in the streets. But for this, we need money or something like that.
The science and the cars are here, but electric vehicles won't be flooding our roads until consumers see them as a necessity, not a luxury, nor the dream they've always been. Sandra Gottman, The Newsmakers.
Joining me now from San Francisco to discuss if electric cars really are the future is Marc Gellar, Vice Chairman of the Electric Auto Association. Mr. Gellar, thank you very much for joining us. That's the debate. Are electric cars the future? It seems everyone would agree. It's very nice to have clean technology, but 20 years after the first car, it's still not really cracked the mass market. What's going wrong?
Well, I wouldn't say something's going wrong. In fact, it's only 4 or 5 years since any of the major manufacturers have introduced mass market electric cars, and we are approaching 1 million cars worldwide. When I first got into an electric car about 15 years ago, there were probably 500 or 600 cars on the road in the United States. Now there are about 400,000. We're making tremendous progress. Electric cars are accelerating the adoption rate faster than hybrid cars, this is happening pretty rapidly.
Okay, well, we have 1 million electric cars out of 1 billion cars. Last year, electric vehicle sales were actually falling. So I'll ask you again, what do you think is holding up the uptake in the mass market of electric vehicles? What would you like to see to encourage their use? Let's put it that way.
Okay, well, what we ought to see to encourage their use is what we've seen in places like Norway and in California, where there have been incentives to increase the adoption of electric cars. And in fact, in Norway today, about 25% of the new vehicles sold are electric. In California, we are slowly increasing the number of electric cars, but what we really need to see is significant numbers of electric cars produced by the manufacturers. There are only 2 or 3 manufacturers at this point who are manufacturing significant numbers of electric cars. And if you go into a dealership, at least in the United States, and attempt to purchase an electric car, often the dealers steer you to the product they are most familiar with, gasoline and petrol vehicles. So what we need to see is a new attitude on the part of the car manufacturers and education for the consumers who have 100 years of experience with gasoline cars and are often fed rather shabby information about how electric cars work and what the benefits are.
Okay, but for a lot of consumers, these electric cars, Tesla and so on, are far too expensive. Many times we're seeing these cars being sold at a discount, at a loss if you like, and still it's very hard for people to afford them.
The Tesla has proven the future of electric cars. Tesla in the United States outsells any other car in the luxury market. It is simply a better car. The real reason people will adopt electric cars is because electric cars are simply a better experience, and they are cheaper to operate.
Oil prices have been coming down very, very sharply. Gasoline prices in concert have been coming down, perhaps by half over the last 4 years. Are you worried about that?
Well, I think clearly high gasoline prices would contribute to people looking more readily at electric alternatives. But what we're seeing, in fact, is that the electric car will contribute to the ever lowering of gasoline prices, as petroleum is simply a less valuable commodity as fewer and fewer individuals need to use it for transportation.
Marc Gellar, Vice Chairman of the Electric Auto Association, thank you very much for your analysis. In today's Picture This, US President Barack Obama has announced a new plan to close down Guantanamo Bay. The detention facility has been open since 2002 and has held more than 700 prisoners from America's so-called War on Terror over the last 14 years.
This is about closing a chapter in our history. It reflects the lessons that we've learned since 9/11.
Today's newsmaker has been Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. He will likely go down in history as one of the most influential justices and decision makers of recent time. But it's the decision that needs to be made in the wake of his death that has prompted sharp debate throughout the already polarized US political landscape. The loss of Scalia leaves the Supreme Court with just 8 justices and with an equal split in liberal and conservative opinion, effectively leaving it paralyzed to make decisions. And now, as the court faces several highly politicized decisions on abortion, affirmative action and immigration, ending the political stalemate becomes increasingly vital to avoid a possible constitutional crisis. You've been watching this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Matthew Moore. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.